Hello Internet, Daniel Driving and Dragons back with my promised video on the Ben Riggs Golden Age of TTRPGs is Dead situation. Update on the 280. Today I'm going to be doing a little bit of plugs, wires work, and the ignition coil change. I will say this, you are not going to see me working on the spark plugs themselves, and that is because my camera died when I was starting to do work on the plugs, and I was not going to put the 6 spark plugs back into the engine just so that I could take them out again and replace them again. So we're going to have wires and ignition coil here. Then we'll be moving on to some more work that a lot of people don't do at their house in the coming videos. Quick update thing. Had a lot of great discussion in the comment section of my last video. There were several, and I kind of expected this, there were several people from the Critical Role fan base that came in who were hung up on the title and were hung up on short parts of it, didn't watch the whole video, obviously, and completely missed things. Some clearly arguing, like, what's your evidence that Matt Mercer is not a good DM or isn't a god-tier DM? And it's like, well, if you listen to the video, I very clearly stated that I don't know how good of a DM he is, and neither do you, because none of us have seen him play. That's kind of the whole point. And then there was some discussion about it being scripted, and I just kind of go back on that, and it's like, we all know it's scripted. The only arguments are either A, the use of the word scripted. Some people will not accept the idea that anything less than every single word is written out, every single thing is taken care of, and there can be no randomness as being scripted. Otherwise, it's not scripted at all. They don't understand the concept of a very loose script. It's all right. It was a lot of great discussion there, and I appreciate that being in the comment section. I'd like to see it continue. I want people to stay and be civil, and I am not shy about just going ahead and banning trolls. Like, if you're not going to come in and speak in good faith and treat, myself and other people with a certain level of respect, you're just going to get banned. But, like I said, a lot of good discussion there, both agree and disagree. And I think this one might be a little bit less controversial, I could say, because everybody seems to be disagreeing with Ben Riggs. And for my part, I mostly do disagree with him, at least from what I've looked at so far. But I'm going to go down his post as he has it on Reddit in the r/RPG section and just kind of give you some of my thoughts on it. So the TLDR, many post-OGL TTRPGs have successfully launched. Their success will splinter the TTRPG community, ending what has been a golden age in the hobby. I don't necessarily agree with that statement as is. I can see where he reaches the conclusion, but let's just kind of go down his whole post and kind of take it point by point here. We're watching a bright and special time in the TTRPG industry pass away before our eyes. Around the start of the 2010s, we saw a dawn of a new golden age tabletop role-playing games. Since then, huge numbers of new players have found the hobby thanks to Stranger Things and actual plays like Critical Role. These new fans discovered vibrant, thrumming TTRPG industry. There's D20 family of fantasy games dominated by D&D 5e, but rich with other games published under the OGL in the fertile depths of the old school Renaissance. There are other mainstream publishers with storied brands such as Call of Cthulhu, Deadlands, Shadowrun. Lastly, there was a flourishing indie TTRPG scene that revolutionized what a TTRPG was, such as Apocalypse World. There's not a lot to dispute in that. He is very much, and this is just, some people are attacking the fact that he says actual plays like Critical Role and Stranger Things, like there wasn't a lot of other stuff that went into it. And to be perfectly honest, people need to lay off of that point. He's summarizing, and he's giving a couple of quick examples. I do it all the time. You see this in online arguments on a regular basis. Somebody will actually you can see it in the comment section of my last video, where I would put out a few examples of some of the poor decisions that were made to pander to certain groups. And I'll use this example, wheelchair access dungeons and wheelchair rules. And out of a short list, you would have somebody jump in and be like, oh, well, what's the problem with wheelchair dungeons and stuff like that? Why is this such a bad thing? And it's like, it's not in and of itself the only problem. And yes, you could just ignore it. It's just one of many, many examples that would fit what the problem is or fit the point being made. In this case, he says Critical Role, Stranger Things. He doesn't need to list out a pandemic that locked everybody inside, a move away from video games because video game publishers have started pissing people off on a regular basis, a rise in geek culture, but he doesn't need to list every single thing that could possibly have led to the contribution of a growth in the RPG world. One thing that I think absolutely needs to be mentioned that kind of is left out of that opening paragraph is probably the biggest thing that has helped this industry with growth and new innovation coming in is simply publishing. The ability to self-publish inexpensively has been a massive boon. It's also been a massive bane. It's been a bad thing too. I mean, everything kind of has two sides. But it's been a massive boon to the TTRPG community because just about anybody can very quickly, very inexpensively go out there and produce something, sell it, and even make a little bit of money off of it to the point where they can develop it further. It's no longer I need to take out a second mortgage, sell off some of my assets, and cash out my 401k just so that I can get a book to print and hope somebody looks at my TTRPG system. I mean, I can make it for free by myself on a PDF on my computer just with an investment of time and put it out. And if it takes off, I can start a Kickstarter or something. I'm no longer held to someplace like a Random House or Penguin or something like that to get my books out for people to see. And I'm no longer having to front all this additional expense if I don't want to. On a side note, and I'll make a video about this later, this is also where AI art is a very good thing. And even to a certain extent, AI writing is a very good thing for the TTRPG community as well. Because the artwork is extremely expensive. Like, especially when you're putting it on the scale of somebody who's just kind of putting this idea out to the community, and let's try and get this idea out and see if people like it. But you got to have some artwork for people to take it seriously. AI art is a easy way for me to get a bunch of different ideas punched out to get me some good artwork to put into my book. And no, I can't copyright that AI art, but it doesn't cost me any. It costs me $2.99 a month for an AI art system and some time to learn how to put a prompt in, as opposed to $200, $300, $400 for some art for a single piece of artwork from a commissioned artist. Anyway, that's one thing he didn't mention that I think probably should be there. Let's continue. The influx of gamers and the rising tide lifts all boats. Novice gamers started playing D&D 5e, yes, but went on to other games because of the OGL. Countless companies and designers making money creating D&D 5e because of the increasing number of gamers. Even strange, freaky, or weird TTRPGs can find an audience. Have you heard of Apollo 47 Technical Manual, the RPG? Recent developments that make it clear that this radiant golden age is ending as surely as the steam engine ended the age of sail, or hobbits bearing a ring ended the third age of Middle Earth. The doom of our time approaches. So that's clearly some very bombastic language. I would argue that the publishing stuff I just went over is way more to thank for things like Apollo 47 Technical Manual getting published, or the weird, strange, freaky RPGs. Because here's the thing. When something is extremely cheap to produce and put out, you can actually make a profit and focus on a small niche. I'm going to tell you right now, wheelchair accessible dungeon would have never been a thing in the 80s. Even if you had, take a modern company, but let's just go back to 1980s technology and business situation, you'd have never gotten the wheelchair dungeon because it didn't cost Wizards anything really to produce that, other than a little bit of time, some employees putting some stuff together. They, of course, did it way more expensively than you would expect just because they're a big corporation. They can throw $1 million at it, and it's no big deal. But that would have not been done in, an 80s publishing environment, because there's no way that such a small niche market as the people who desperately needed representation for people in wheelchairs in their RPG could have provided a return on investment. The death of TSR largely came from them pumping out so many splat books that appealed to smaller and smaller niches in the community. And they would end up with all these books that just didn't sell going out and just being produced on top of each other. Now, there's other parts to it, like in Ben Riggs' book, he talks about what was essentially a loan stacking or check kiting style scheme with the publisher to get advances and then have to pay it back with the sales and the sales not doing so, et cetera, et cetera. But the fact of the matter is that even TSR, who was literally producing stuff just so they could essentially get a loan from their publisher through exploiting a system, would not have done something like a wheelchair accessible dungeon or anything else that targets such an unbelievable minority of the community, particularly if it was something like Radiant Citadel or some of the other things they've done that not only targets and panders to a very small minority, but also infuriates a large part of their established base. Because of how inexpensive some of this stuff has become and how easily accessible it is, it's no longer a major investment to pander to a small niche. And that's a big part of it. So let's look at the doom of our time. In the wake of the OGL scandal this past winter, a number of companies have successfully launched new TTRPGs, intended to move them past the possibility of Wizards of the Coast ever threatening their business again. Some of the games grossed millions in crowdfunding campaigns and all have been positively reviewed. Asterisk, they have not all been positively reviewed. The thing is that most of the ones that were poorly reviewed, you haven't heard of. Some cite the success of these games, which is intended to replace 5e OGL content for the companies involved, as a sign of the continued growth of the industry. They're not. Rather, they're signs that the industry has peaked and is about to enter decline. Why? After the OGL crisis of 2023, I became pessimistic about the attempt to kill the OGL had done to our hobby. Others told me that the result of the crisis would be a blooming of thousands of flowers, discouraged from using 5e Wizards of the Coast, attempting to kill OGL. We would get amazing new games. Maybe every one of those TTRPGs is going to be amazing. Maybe every one's so fun and so captivating that lawns will go unmowed, pets unfed, and diapers unchanged because we'll all be busy playing those games. Problem is, TTRPG business has been devilishly difficult, and only very rarely does the creation of a phenomenal game actually lead to financial success. Death of the OGL and the creation of these games has fundamentally changed the industry in such a way that it'll be harder for those companies to make money in the future. A difficult business is about to become more difficult. Consider the state of the industry a mere 18 months ago. Countless publishers from MCDM and Cobble Press of Wizards of the Coast were all making 5e material. It was easy to purchase products from multiple publishers because they were running 5e. You could work all these companies at your table, made it easier for companies to share customers. Birth of the TTRPGs, birthed by the OGL crisis, were about to make that sort of customer sharing much, much harder. MCDM is publishing a TTRPG where you roll 2d6 to hit. Pathfinder 2nd Edition, the remaster, has no alignment changeability scores. Critical Role has dropped 5e like a dead cockroach and is playtesting its own fantasy game, Daggerheart, which uses 2d12s, and a horror game named Candidella Obscura. And of course, there is the Rising Godzilla 6th Edition D&D, which scientists say will attack our shores in spring of 2024. So far, there's no hint of an OGL for that game. Problem is, 5e was not just a game, it was a massive community of players. Countless companies could thrive making products from that community. These new games are a shattering of that community. Instead of countless companies working to make your 5e game better, we're now asking you to become MCDM or Darrington Press or Paizo or D&D 6e players, entering an era of division, faction, and balkanization. These companies are now asking fans to choose sides. It also means it is going to become more difficult for them to share customers. How interested will Pathfinder fan be for an MCDM product or 6th edition? History suggests these sort of barriers depress sales. He's got a little bit of a point there. He absolutely does. When you have multiple similar products, no company gets one big piece of the pie. They have to divide it up. But there's actually a little bit of just economic misunderstanding here. The same kind of economic understanding that leads to socialist ideology. And that is that it's based on this idea that, it's a zero-sum game. In order for Wizards of the Coast to win, MCDM has to lose. And that's not the case. You will also now have multiple companies, from large to small, that are dedicating resources to bringing people into the hobby. And you may have somebody who would love to come in and play Cyberpunk, or who would love to come in and play some kind of horror game like Call of Cthulhu, who would not love to come in and play Dungeons & Dragons, who have no interest in fantasy. And now, because you don't have a monolith that has a pop culture draw dragging this stuff in, all these companies are going to have to. Now, what I will say is, and I believe he mentions this a little bit later, is the geek chic culture, the geek culture. That is coming to an end. The geek pop culture, nerd culture that has been a big part of entertainment for the past 10 or so years, 10, 11 years, that is starting to kind of hit its decline. It is starting to become, to use an example, it's like you got a lot of people who love something because it's edgy and it's transgressive, and it gets in there and it sticks the middle finger to the status quo, and then that becomes the status quo. It's a rock and roll type thing. It's not transgressive to say these things anymore. These don't step on people's toes. And the people who are just there because it's transgressive, that appeal's not going to be there anymore. But that doesn't mean that there's not going to still be appeal, and it doesn't mean that you won't be able to pull in these additional revenue streams. And a big part of that, just to be honest, goes right back to that inexpensive publishing thing. We can now afford to have lots of small companies. It doesn't cost millions and millions of dollars to get your TTRPG to a large market. All it takes is a few clicks of a mouse and an account on DriveThruRPG and a little bit of work on Twitter and YouTube and Facebook. Now, that doesn't guarantee success, just like having a good game doesn't guarantee success. There are some very good games that just don't get played because for whatever reason they don't catch on. They don't get the right people. They don't scratch the right itch. There's somebody else who does the marketing side a little better. And it's too similar to something that is already more available. Like, there's a lot of reasons why a good game may fail while a bad game is successful and has marketing. I mean, let's take a look at Candela Obscura. Candela Obscura is by all accounts a terrible game, but I guarantee you that it will be more financially successful, at least in terms of raw sales numbers, than 99% of the indie RPGs that end up on DriveThruRPG, just because of the marketing juggernaut that is Critical Role. But all the true hurdles to the industry have gotten lower, and that is going to be helpful in growing the pie so that we don't all have to fight over pieces of it and necessarily lose some in the carving. He says this has all happened before. In the 90s, TSR, the first company to publish D&D, embarked on publishing setting after setting after setting for the game over 1997. By 1997, over a dozen settings were sold by the company. Fans stopped being fans of D&D and instead became fans of a particular setting and would only buy products for that setting. In 97, TSR was near death, and setting releases had plummeted from the hundreds of thousands of copies in the 80s to mere 7,152 copies sold for the Birthright campaign setting in its first year of release. D&D was only saved from a terrible fate by Wizards of the Coast and their fat stacks of cash. They purchased TSR in the summer of 1997. Some may say it's unfair to compare different settings of the 90s to different systems today. Settings and systems are different after all, and I do agree with that point. Switching systems is a bigger ask than switching settings, and therefore this change should have a larger impact on sales. Now, he's both accurate and inaccurate there. I really find Ben Riggs saying this to be kind of disingenuous. He knows better. He knows that the multiple settings is not what killed TSR. He wrote a book on it and did a ton of research on it. He knows good and well that it was the financial practices of Lorraine Williams more than anything else that drove TSR into the dirt. It was not a whole bunch of settings. It was not a whole bunch of, splat books that killed D&D. It was a couple of things. One, the satanic panic was ended. So like I said, that edge crowd, it wasn't edgy anymore. So it went back to just being nerds and geeks who like to play TTRPGs. The people who were there just because, upside down cross pentagram they were gone because it didn't have that appeal anymore. And you had Lorraine Williams, basically leveraging everything under the sun. She was basically doing what Enron was doing without the accounting trick. She was leveraging debt and running the entire company based off of projections and future profits and saying, well, we're going to buy 2 million of these books and we're going to get an advance on all these books, and basically like a loan from the publisher. And if we sell all those books, we'll make a huge profit. And if we sell 2/3 of them, we'll break even. And then she'd sell 1/10 of them. But all she would do is go do another book and take the advance from that book and move it over. And that's how she kept the company going. He wrote a book on this. He knows that it's not multiple settings killing the player base that caused this. Now, where he touches around the edges of what I think is true is with geek chic culture starting to come to an end and people moving away from the it's cool to be uncool thing, you're going to lose that appeal to all TTRPGs, and we will have some contraction, but it's not the end of a golden age, I don't think. Honestly, I'm not even sure that 5e is a golden age of TTRPGs to begin with, just because I do believe there is a large amount of artificial inflation involved in it. And so this is all happening again. TTRPG audience is fracturing at the seams. It will hurt sales and growth. Focus only on MCDM. This current backer kit is likely the most successful campaign the company will ever see. Every campaign after this will struggle to get the same sort of sales numbers as people slowly bleed away to the competition. Paizo will say, check out our competing fantasy game. WotC will batter us with a punishing wave of marketing to convince us all of the newness and hotness of 6th edition. And fans will bleed away. Furthermore, what will happen to the YouTube channel is the foundation of MCDM success. Matt Colville is a master communicator and a major evangelist for D&D. His hobby was in his heyday. He's passionate, intelligent, and inspiring. If Dungeon Masters could go to the locker room and get a pep talk from their coach in the middle of the game, that coach would be Matt Colville. How much time is Colville going to dedicate to D&D when it's essentially his competition? I will say this, I think he's missing a huge chunk in that particular section that he puts there. Because he's going out saying, hey, Matt Colville, was this great evangelist and communicator. I don't think Matt Colville brought a single person to the game or to the hobby. His YouTube channel was not something that evangelized and brought in new players. Now, it may have made more players that came in stick. It may have made players more enthusiastic. But at least in the beginning, his YouTube channel was something you looked up after you already had the interest in D&D. It wasn't, man, I looked up Matt Colville and he talked about D&D and now I want to play tabletop role-playing games. There might be one or two people that it worked that way for, but that's not going to be the majority. It's going to be people were looking for D&D already and found Matt Colville and maybe he poured some gas on the fire. What's going to happen in this case is now Matt Colville is going to have to go out and learn to broach that completely virgin market and then use his abilities to evangelize to them for his own game. And Paizo's going to have to do the same thing. Wizards of the Coast already knows how to do it. Well, they may have forgotten recently, but they did know how to do it. The point is that everybody's going to have to get that little piece of their business. Past year, he's put out less than 20 videos on his channel. Videos are now ranging widely from TV reviews and interviews, language scholars to some D&D content, discussion from the creation of a new RPG. Go back 5 years, Colville was putting out video after video, fantastic advice about running D&D, usually with 5e as the default. He dispensed some of the best TTRPG advice I've ever seen, but it appears his content is fundamentally shifting and he's asking his audience to go with him somewhere. Look at recent MCDM's efforts. The point of view, the Wizards of the Coast. It's all a ruin, disaster, and calamity. Master communicator and D&D fanatic has gone on to convincing people to try D&D and explaining how to best play D&D to instead asking his 439,000 subscribers to stop playing D&D and then to play his game instead. Not to mention that Critical Role, a huge reason for the recent surge in the popularity of D&D, is likewise stopping their support of D&D, asking their 2.1 million YouTube subscribers to start playing one of their 2 new games instead. I will not mention that, lest it further trouble the sleep of the D&D people at Wizards of the Coast. What if 2.1 million people simply don't buy 6th edition? In summary, all these events are interfering with the developments and creation of a golden age of TTRPGs. The removal of D&D from Critical Role hurts everyone involved. For years, Critical Role's pitch was watch voice actors play D&D, a concept even my 80-year-old Aunt Sonia understands, to the pitch of watch voice actors play Candela Obscura. But what is Candela Obscura? If I ask Aunt Sonia to guess, Candela Obscura was a potpourri sound. Brand recognition that drove people to Critical Role was gone. Simultaneously, splintering the D&D 5e community will make it harder for new designers to break into the industry and harder for established companies to attract new companies. Growth in the TTRPG will slow. Just don't agree with this. Humans are wonderful at adapting. And that's just what's going to happen, is that people will adapt to bring in the companies, to bring in the customers. I seriously doubt that even if Matt Mercer stood up and told all the critters on Critical Role on the next episode, do not buy Dungeons & Dragons. The new Dungeons & Dragons is evil and terrible. Buy my book. He's going to run into the same problem that we all run into as game masters when we decide we want to run a new system, which is our players look up and say, yeah, but I don't want to buy new books. I already know this. I'm already comfortable with it. I already enjoy it. Why don't I just keep playing what I'm going to play? D&D is going to lose far more people to simply not wanting to move on to a new system from D&D 5e than they're going to lose to anything Matt Mercer says. And that's just the honest truth of the matter. Plus, they haven't dropped 5e. They haven't really dropped it at all. Now, they've started using Daggerheart and Candela Obscura, and they're using it in their stuff, but they haven't dropped it. And as for Matt Colville, of course he's moved on. There's really only so many ways you can say the same TTRPG advice over and over and over again on your YouTube channel before you're just repeating content. His goals have kind of changed. He's got his audience, and he can always point people back to old videos if they want his gaming advice. Now he's bringing in other things that are helping him build out a brand for his own game, which is just a change in focus. As he said, it's been probably years since Matt Colville. It's been probably 2 years since Matt Colville was a serious Dungeons and Dragons YouTuber. It hadn't killed Wizards of the Coast to have Matt Colville be not a D&D YouTuber for the past 2 years. Why would it start now? So he says, what would the future look like here? If I'm right, this is how the golden age of TTRPGs dies. Certain things follow naturally from these events. Here are my predictions, that I may be held accountable for rashness and writing it all down. I may be wrong, but if I'm right, following seems likely to pass. 6th edition will not do as well as 5th edition. Even more firings will follow. Wizards, which struggled to know what to do with D&D when it was a success, no honor among thieves starter set really, will be flummoxed by what to do when it's perceived as a failure. This is cyclical. It's been kind of the common thing throughout D&D's history. An edition is great, an edition is not so great, another edition is great, another edition is not so great. It's kind of bounced back and forth. You get new generations of players with each one. I have a feeling, he's right. 6th edition won't be anywhere near as successful as 5th edition. But is it going to be the death and doom of D&D? No. And is Wizards going to have no idea with what to do with it? No, they're not. If anything, Hasbro will cause problems because Hasbro's the ones who really wanted to focus on branding and licensing as opposed to just putting out a decent game and doing what they needed to do. Will more followings fire? Probably. Because you're going to have less, maintenance just doesn't require as many people as creation and launch. But is it going to be a complete and total disaster? Maybe, maybe not. We'll talk about that in my recap of all the stupid stuff Wizards of the Coast has done this year that's coming later. No MCDM RPG crowdfunding campaign will ever do better than its initial campaign to fund its TTRPG. That's probably true for a lot of reasons. One, because if the MCDM game goes off really well, they won't need the crowdfunding campaigns anymore. They'll just be supplemental. They're not going to be the primary thing that gets the damn game out to the people. Not to mention, MCDM has had some really, really, really inefficient and lengthy design cycles here with all the stuff they're doing. I honestly think that a lot of the people who did fund this game are going to be pissed when deadline after deadline gets missed. which is going to hurt that, but that's an MCDM thing. That is not a TTRPG community thing. Cobbled Press post-OGL game, Tales of the Valiant, will be criticized for being too similar to 5e. For Cobbled Press, I see two futures. Perhaps they will slowly bleed fans in the same way MCDM will, but if 6th edition is too different, people really won't want to move from 5e. Cobbled Press has positioned themselves to be the next Paizo, and Tales of the Valiant the next Pathfinder. Possibly. I really don't think anybody's going to criticize it for being too similar to 5e. It's not like Tales of the Valiant, it's not like they've hidden the ball on that one and tried to claim they created some great new thing. They're essentially saying, hey, come over here since Wizards of the Coast is pissing you off, and it's more or less the same game with the names changed to protect the guilty. So I think he's got a little bit of doom and gloom and a little overstated on the Cobbled Press thing. Frequency of multi-million-dollar TTRPGs Kickstarters will decrease. Yes, that'll happen. That's a blurb, and that's also, once again, kind of comes from the artificial boom of the geek subculture being a thing with, your Big Bang Theories and Stranger Things and all that stuff. Attendance at major gaming conventions will plateau. Of course it will. That's just going to happen, if for no other reason than those kind of events. With current inflation and economic trends and whatnot, they're going to become more and more and more expensive, more and more and more restrictive, and they're going to have less and less and less appeal. And that's just kind of the nature. I'm honestly surprised that major gaming conventions didn't torpedo, and more in recent years anyway. I'm kind of surprised that they didn't kind of collapse, just because of the excessively online culture of the world and how much we've moved away from personal interaction. TTRPGs will become less interesting, less exciting, less creative, and despite all the new systems, it will grow less diverse and become even harder to make money in the TTRPG community, broken into factions. And so a golden age sputters out. I think that is just economic illiteracy and foolishness. That isn't correct. And I explained why earlier in this video. The fact of the matter is, it has become so much easier and so much cheaper to put something out and to publish something that you can be profitable, especially on a personal scale. You may not be able to become the next TSR or the next Paizo or even like the next MCDM or the next mid-level, Cobbled Press Troll Lord Gaming. But you can make a pretty decent income for you and a group of your friends if you can put out and reasonably well market a decent niche product. And I think you're going to see a battle for those niches. Because why am I going to fight Paizo over generic fantasy? Why am I going to fight Wizards of the Coast over generic fantasy? When I can go over here and I can target some small little dark fantasy niche or paranormal romance niche or something and put out a game. And yeah, I may only capture 20, 30, 40,000 players. If I'm extremely lucky, I might get 50,000 players. But if I've got 50,000 players buying my PDF book at $6 a pop, and I'm collecting $3 off of it, I've got myself a nice little $150,000 hit for those books. And I can hit those little niches, and I can make myself and a couple of friends maybe a pretty decent little personal income. And so I think you're going to see a ton of diversity if you look for it, and a ton of new games coming out, because the barrier to entry is so low that you're going to have a lot of people that, for better or for worse, and for competent or incompetent, are going to shoot their shots at decent small niches and small groups. And you're going to have a lot of diversity and stuff out there. I just don't see that happening. Are you going to have as many big megalith giant successes? No. But all it is it's just going to disperse like Terminator 2, and instead of it being one robot running down the street, it's going to be a whole bunch of little dots that are essentially the same thing coming back together. Unless something truly dramatic and game-changing hits the industry, what could change this grim future? I suppose a group of publishers coalescing around a single system might change matters, or something truly inconceivable, something like giving 6th edition an OGL and putting the rules in Creative Commons. After last month's blood sacrifices on the altar of profitability, who has even left at Wizards with the power and experience to advocate such a thing? It has been a grand era to be a gamer, and one in which we have been fortunate to live through. Yeah, I've already given you your great thing that would change this grim future. It's already there. It's stuff like drive-through RPG. It's self-publishing. It's AI art. It's even AI storytelling that can produce frameworks for people to craft adventures and sell things for. It is so much cheaper and easier. The barrier to entry is so much lower that instead of you having one monolithic publisher with 5 or 6 medium-sized publishers and then a bunch of stuff on the bottom, you're just going to have a few medium-sized publishers and a whole bunch of indie games out there. And the people, gamers are going to have their choice there. Now, you may not ever have another D&D has 20 million players or whatever, but you should have 10 games that have 2 million players. That's what I got to say. Tell me where I'm right. Tell me where I'm wrong. Tell me how Ben Riggs knows so much more than me, and just let me know in the comment section below. Appreciate you sticking it out. This has been a long video, and I will see you guys next time when we are ripping the clutch slave cylinder and the power steering lines out of the 280. See you next time.